Welcome everybody to the first video over making decisions. I'll be your decision maker, Jared Rodriguez. We'll be going through building random things utilizing the decisions tool, the low to no code software. And today we're going to build a calculator. So if you have your decisions instance with you, then just navigate to that decisions instance. I'm going to drag over mine and we're going to navigate to it. Alrighty, let's go to my installation here. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore all these prompts and I'm going to create my own project folder. So in Decisions 7, our create folder step is located here by clicking the three dots, and we call our designer folders designer project folders. So I'm just going to create one. I'm going to make it a root folder, and I'm going to call this my calculator app. And that's what we're going to do. We're just going to build a simple calculator that can do simple mathematical functions. So the first thing we're going to need is we're going to need a form to display to the user so they can see the calculator. So I'm going to hit the folder action create form. I'm going to hit the tile there, and then I'm going to call this the calculator. And click create. Okay, so I'm just going to resize this form designer just a little bit. I'm going to drag another grid over. So I just want the grid layout. So we're going to move this over these this section. My goodness, I just can't talk. Over this section. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a multi-line text box for the top part right here. Now this multi-line text box, this is going to act like our screen. So this is going to be where we will place all the numbers or the mathematical operators inside this thing. So it's going to be really cool when it's all completed. I'm going to click on this grid right here, and I want to change the third 30 row. I want to edit it and just make it about 5 pixels, so it should shrink perfect. And then I'm going to shrink this down, and I want this to go a little bit more up. I want the screen to be a little bit bigger. To manipulate the control to make it larger or bigger, you can click on the arrows here, which will make it larger or smaller depending on the direction that you click the arrow. So I'm going to change this one to be the 5. And then I'm going to switch this one back to 30, 30 fixed. And then I'm going to expand this here. Okay, perfect. I like this layout of the screen. Okay, so now we have the screen, and this is going to be, I'm going to call this the, what should we call this? The data name for here is going to be the, I'm going to call it calculator screen. Calculator screen. So that's going to be the data name. Now, I have an error because every time you use decisions building in the form designer, you're going to need a button of some sort to remove that error because it's saying, hey, I need an actionable outcome button to send this data to. So I'm just going to add a button. I'm just going to say that this is the done button, not one. I just can't type. There we go. The done button. Whew. Man, who knew typing could be so hard? Okay, and now this is going to be the grid that houses all the buttons that will be clicked to place those operators up here. So I'm going to use the advanced layout portion of decisions. It makes it easier to move and adjust the different layouts so that I can move my buttons and organize them the way it would look on a calculator. So I need about like a 3x3 grid. So I'm going to add one more resizable column and one more resizable row. And as you can see, it's already adjusting there nicely. Okay. And I'll actually need another column. I think it will be like the 1.7 or 1.5. Let's see how that looks. Column. Perfect. I like the way that looks. Okay, so now we have basically our buttons. So we should be able to have our 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 0 should be here. And then we could have some mathematical operators. So let's see. Let's actually add one more row because we need to add the multiplication, summation, subtraction, and the division. So let's add one more resizable row. That looks better. So in conclusion, this should be your setup for your columns and your rows if you're going to build this calculator app in Decisions. Right now I'm going to click Done. And we are going to put the buttons here. Now you may be wondering, what buttons should I be using? We have these buttons called Event Buttons. And the event button is a really cool button control in the form designer that allows users to click a button and have it trigger another process. And we're going to use several of these to trigger placing a number, placing the difference, or whatever it may be. And so we're going to have it do that. So let's see, the first one, we're going to place one over here. And this one, we're going to call it this is going to be, let's call it I think the plus is first. So we're going to call this the plus button. So it's just going to have a plus sign on it. And we're going to call this the plus button. And I'm going to say plus event button. We'll need to have our buttons renamed because we'll be utilizing another feature in the form designer called active form flows. And if we name it the button appropriately, we'll be able to tell it to run the corresponding active form flow to display it to the end user. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to add another one, and this is going to be the minus button. So minus, and this is going to be the minus button. Minus event button. Now notice how the buttons don't have a lot of space in between them. That's because we designed it, or I designed it, where we don't have any spacing between the columns. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change this grid, and for the columns, I'm just going to add a 5 pixel spacing in between all of the columns. And I'm also going to do the rows as well. This is just an aesthetic thing. It makes it look neater because there's some spacing in between the buttons. So that's why I'm going to do that. All right, so we got our minus button. I'm going to add another one here, and we're going to call this the divide button. Divide event button. And then this is going to be the divide. I'm also going to add, let's see, this is going to be, so we got, multiply. We got to multiply it. And this is going to be, the text is just going to be X for multiply. Or actually, we're going to do the asterisk so we don't confuse it with the letter X. Multiply. And then we shall have, this is going to be the multiply event button. And so we're just going to keep doing this for a while. So I'm going to do, this is going to be one event button. Put this one here. This is going to be 2. I'm just going to say 2 event button. Say this is 3, and we're going to call this the 3 event button, and I'm just going to keep going on and on. So it's going to be 4 event button. Put this here. This is going to be 5. Yes, 5. Put this here. Put this here. 6. I'm going to say this is 7. And that's 7, 8, right here, 8, event button, and then we're going to have 9 right here. So this is going to be the 9 event button. All right, perfect. Now we're looking good. Notice that I have that little, oops, I didn't want to do that. So I'm going to hit my undo button, There we go. So now I have all my buttons there. I do have to re-add that one. What I meant to say was, notice that I have that little scroll bar there. That just means that the size of my form that I've allocated does not fit the grid size very well. So I'm just going to make this a little larger. And so that we can remove it. Let's see how that looks. Oh, I guess it's fine. Okay. So now what we're going to do is I have to add one more. This is going to be the 0. So it's going to be 0, and this is going to be the 0 event button. And then over here, what we're going to add is we're going to add the event button. This is going to be for raising it to the power of 2. So we're going to, not square root. I forgot what it's called. We're going to square. That's what we're going to do. We're going to square the number that we put in there. And then over here, let's see, what was the one that we should have here? Multiply. I think there was one more button we can add here. If not, we can repurpose it for something else. It's here. We can do square root. Let's just do that. We'll do a square root function. Square root. And I spelled square. Square root. I'll call this SR event button. All right, so basically we're going to have a process that's going to square, that's going to put a number up here in our little screen here. Let's put this back up to make that a little bit better. Let me move this here. Looks like a calculator. Perfect. So we have our screen here where whenever we click on these options, we're going to display that number and that corresponding letter. And what I'm going to do, just so we can see this better, is I'm actually going to make the font size just a little bit bigger over across the entire form so we can see it. And let's bold it too. Perfect. All right, so now we can see it. It's a little bit better. I'm going to save this. And let's actually, I'm going to add more. I'm just changing the design aesthetic so that looks more appealing and pleasing to me. You guys can definitely do this if you want. You don't have to. Boom, boom, boom. I'm going to, go down. There we go, because I want to make this screen just a little bit bigger here. There we go. Change this to 30. After we change this to 30, I'm going to try, I think it's this one, is the 5 pixel. Nope, I almost had it. I think it's the next one. I'm trying to set this one to be 5 pixels, so it looks a lot neater and cleaner. A lot of getting the design that you want is just messing around with the lines of the grids. Hey, I was right. And once you get that down, then you can move on to the next part of the process. Okay. So here is our base calculator. Here is the screen that we will be using. And here are the actionable buttons that we will be using. Another thing we forgot is we need another event button that's going to calculate. So we need to calculate. And this is going to be the calculate event button. I'm going to move this done away. It's going to move it all the way over here. And then I'm going to have this event button here. We need another one, and this is going to be clear. So I'm just going to call it CLR. I'll say this is the CLR event button. Okay, so there's the form of our calculator. So let me save. I'm going to close this, and I just want to run. I just want to see what it looks like. Run form. All right. So this is what it would look like. This is the interactable part of it. Obviously, we can type in here, but we won't be using it for typing. So that reminds me that I need to make sure that this is not editable. So since we just want this to be a read-only field, we don't want users to be able to type into it, we are going to go to behavior, and we're going to uncheck the initially enabled. This will allow us to make sure that it is only used to display information, and it does not allow the user to type in and overwrite the data that's within here. Okay, and then what I want to do is see if I can center it. I don't know if I can center it. If not, it's no worries. Okay, perfect. No worries. Okay, so this finishes the calculator of the way it looks. So we got the design on this. So now what we need to do is we need to create the active form flows that will display the text and combine the string next to that specific part of the process. So what we're going to do is you're going to click on this checkered box of this form-based canvas, and we're immediately going to go to Add Active Form Flows. Now, this is the new feature in Decisions that's replacing data flows and visibility rules and validation rules and outcome rules. So that's why we'll be utilizing the active form flows to utilize that new feature and to get you guys exposure to it, because it's really cool. It's a really neat feature in 7, and it's super fun. Okay, so we're going to click Add, and we're going to call this let's see, what should we call this? This is going to be add 1 to the screen. Yeah, add 1 to, or I'm going to say this is input 1 to calculator screen. And this is going to be raised whenever someone, so this is the triggers, this is what connects that button to the flow that we are running. And so I want the input 1 to calculator screen is going to be the one event button, because once a user clicks on this one button right here, I want the number 1 to appear in the screen. All right. So once I do that, then I can edit my rule flow. That's the name, the generic name of the active form flow when you get it. If you want to change the name of the active form flow, you would have to click the info panel on the left, and you can just call this input 1 to input 1 to calculator screen. Forgot the name. Calculator screen. And then that name will be switched after I save it and if I find it in my Decisions project folder. Okay. So now what I want to do is I want to join the strings together. So I'm going to grab a join string step, which I think we have. Perfect. Join strings. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take in the initial string, or actually I already have that. So I'm going to just join strings. All right, and then what I'm going to do is, let's see, there's not going to be any separator, so I'm just going to select this to ignore. And what we're going to do is we're going to build the array, the list of strings. So I'm going to add 2 of these. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to select from flow on the first iteration or item 0 of this join strings. I'm going to select from flow, and I'm going to grab the form data, and then I'm going to select the calculator. Let's see, where is my text area? So the text area, which in this case will be my calculator screen, is going to be the value. So I want to grab this value, which I think it should say. You have to grab the initial value, and I want to combine that with a constant 1. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, hey, take the initial value of the calculator screen, which in this case is called the text area, and I want to add or concatenate 1 to it. After I do that, then I'm going to output you can click on your output editor by clicking the edit output mapping, or by hitting the change value on the outputs here. And I'm going to change the value of that text area. So text area, and we're going to change that value. And click OK. And then I'm going to save. Now let's test this to make sure that I have configured my logic correctly and that it performs the way I want it to. How you test any type of active form flow, data flow, visibility, or validation rule is you always create a flow, and you can just call it test flow, or in this case, since this will be the flow that I will use to run my calculator, I'm going to call this run calculator. Calculator. Here we go. And I'm going to click create. I'm going to drag the show form step on the canvas. I'm going to pick or create. I'm going to pick my calculator. And then I'm just going to connect the paths together. And since I won't be input anything on the screen, I'm just going to click this to ignore so that we can remove that yellow validation. And then I'm going to debug. All right. And look at it. It worked as expected. So I can click on any buttons, but I can add one to this screen. Now notice when I click on it again, it does not add that string to it. Because if I did this correctly, if I keep clicking on it, then it should add that number 1. So let's see. All right, so it looks like we need to configure that active form flow a little differently. So what we want to do is we want to go back to it. We want to edit it, edit input 1 on calculator screen, move on to let's do it this way. Since there's no separator, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a create data step. Or actually, I don't need to add the create data step. Let's try it this way. Instead of using the initial value, I'm just going to say whatever that value is. So instead of initial value, I'm just going to do value. Done. And then we're going to save. And I'm going to close this, close this, close this, close this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to debug this one more time. So now what I want to happen is every time I click 1, it should have a series of 1s next to it. So I click 1 once, I click 1 twice, and now it's correctly adding extra 1s to my process because I used the value, not the initial value. Okay, so that finishes that part of the process, and that's most of the logic. So now what I'm going to do is I just need to copy that flow several times. So what I'm going to do is, see, I'm going to add another one. Now, unfortunately, we won't be able to I won't be able to pick a new rule flow. So that's the thing that makes data flows a little bit easier is that you can pick a data flow. Active form flows, you currently can't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this flow, and I'm going to just make a template of this step. Or actually, I don't really need to because I can easily recreate this logic since it's only one step. I could save a template and then reuse that, and it would have those fields initially mapped into it. But since it's only one step, I'm just going to create this flow several times. So we're going to input 2, calculator screen, and we're going to grab 2. Change it here. And then I'm going to get the join string step, join strings, boop, boop, put this here. And then I'm just going to do the same thing that I did. So we're going to grab the form data, we're going to grab the text area, value, and then we're going to select from flow, or not select from flow, we're going to build the array. Add this twice. This one's going to be, oops, not the separator, I messed this up. The separator is going to be ignore. The first item, item 0, is going to be form data, text area, value. And then we're going to set this one to a constant 2. And then we're going to output this to form data, text area, value. And there we go. I think I changed this. Yes, I did. We have a saying in decisions that you should debug early, debug often. So I'll click OK. And let's debug this just to make sure. Because now, since I configured this, once I debug, I should be able to add a series of 1 and 2. There we go. So we got the calculator somewhat working. Okay. So I'm going to do this several times. I may in this video just add like a fast part of it where I'm just going to fast forward and be creating those flows because it's literally the same thing for all of it, for all the numbers at least. All right, so now that we have all the numbers configured, when I close this and debug it, you will be able to see that I can click any of those numbers and they will appear in the screen. Oh, looks like we have an error. So let me do 7, 9. So we have an error with 6. Let's see. Okay, so I wonder if I did not map it back into the text value in the text area or the calculator screen area. So let's go back into 6, edit it. So it looks like I put it on the initial value. I didn't put it on the value. So let's change that mapping and then it should work. So we're going to do text area and I'm going to delete this line and then we're going to value. Now it should work. That should be fixed. I'm going to debug, start the debug. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And you can see the executions in the debugger of all the numbers that have been, or the active form flows that have run. And you'll see that I've clicked on them twice each. Okay, so that's the numbers. Now we need to add the text to it, which will be pretty much the same logic that we have configured in the process here. So what we're going to do is for these buttons, we're going to do the exact same thing. We're going to add a active form flow and just say input +to calc screen. And we're going to use the same steps. So where's the plus? There we go, plus event button. And we're going to use the same steps, the join strings, input +to calc screen. So join strings without separator. And instead of it being a number, it's going to be the plus sign. And then we're going to output this to the text area, and we're going to change the value here. And we're going to do that there. So now what's going to happen is anytime we select the plus sign, it will add that plus sign there. So I debug, let's start debug. See, so now I can add the plus signs to my process. All right, let's hit done. Okay, so let us edit this and let us do the same for the minus, the divide, the multiplication, and the exponent, and then the square root. When we get to these two, I'll show you the logic on how I figured those out. Oh, I know what it was. So it's not going to be the square root. We want this to be the decimal point. Boom. This is going to be the decimal point. That's what it is. I knew there was something that was missing. So we're going to make that, since it's a decimal point, a little bit bigger. So now we can add decimal points to our process. Alrighty, so now let's debug. We have almost all the buttons complete. So we have 1 minus 2, let's see, divided by 6, multiplied by 5, dot 75. And I believe that's all the buttons we have configured. The only buttons that are left to configure are the exponent, the calculate, and the clear. Because let's say we want to clear this and we don't want to, add this all together. Then we need to enable that button and add a flow that will clear out the process. All right, so what do we do now? So now we're going to work on the exponent. Now, it's important to note that when you work on the exponent, we're going to be using a step to calculate the mathematical expression utilizing the evaluate dynamic expression step. So if you don't know what that means, if you can go to your website and you go to documentation.decisions.com, you will see that you can type in the search bar, evaluate dynamic expression. And you will see, let's see, is this the one? Nope. Let's do evaluate expression. There we go. The evaluate expression document, which I'll link in this YouTube video so you have access to it, that you will need to, for exponents, you will need to say, hey, where is it? You will need to use the POW. So this logic is going to be a little, not a little tricky, but we're going to have to add more to it. So we need to add this text into this, the initial value text into here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back into our form, and for our active form flow for the exponent, we're going to add another one, and this is going to be input square, input POW into calc screen. And this is going to be whenever we hit the exponent. And we're just going to do a squared. We're not going to do a cubed or to the fourth power or anything like that. We're just going to make it simple. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to join strings, still without separator. We're going to keep using this step that we've used throughout this entire process. But instead of utilizing the constant value for the second item in the list, we're going to add one more. What we're going to do is we're going to use this thing called the merge plain text editor. Now what this thing allows us to do is we can combine text using some of the variables already located within the flow. So when I do show editor, I can open the form data. And what I'm going to do is I want to say we want to add the POW. We want to add the initial text area value. So the initial text area value right here, or not the initial, excuse me, the value here, and then we're going to do comma 2. So what's going to happen is it's going to take whatever is in that box, and it's going to put those values within those brackets and within that parameter so that when we use the evaluate dynamic expression step, we can calculate its output. I'm going to change the value. Boom. Okay. So now let's save this calculator app and let's close this. Let's debug. Let's run this. So if I can do 1 plus 2 times 6 divided by 12.2222, and let's say I want to square root this. All right. Okay, so it looks like we have a little bit of a logic error. So let's go and see what happened. Let's see. The initial value was this. Ah, okay. So it looks like we had some logic that we messed up. So it did this multiple times, and that's not what we want. So instead of using the join strings, we probably have to use a different step. So let's go ahead and go back to it. And instead of using the join string step, since we don't need to join strings, we just need to add that parameter to it, the POW. We're going to edit this. We're actually going to remove the join strings. And what we're going to do is we're just going to create data. Now, this create data step is a step that's commonly used just to create flow data to make sure that it can be manipulated in the flow designer. And so we're going to call this new text value. And I'm going to save this. And what we're going to do is I'm going to merge the plain text editor here. I'm going to call this POW. We're going to add the initial value here. And then we're going to say comma 2. And then we're going to save. So, and then we're going to output that to the text area. And that should only add those bracketed values. Oops, I want this here. And that should only add those, POW bracket or braces. No, parentheses. Can't talk. And it should just allow us to square the entire thing. All right, so let's click OK, and now let's test that function out. Let's debug. Let's start. We're going to say 1 plus 3 minus 5 divided by 9. And then we're going to say, let us square root it. Perfect. Not square root. Let us raise it to the power of 2. And that's exactly what we want it to look like, because that's what the documentation on Decisions website says we need to do, to raise it to a specific power. So you could change the second number to be cubed or whatever you want, but it could be 3, it could be 5, it could be 7, it could be 20. But I'm just going to make it simple, and we're just going to make it a square. Okay, so we got that working. Now what's the next step? Well, we need to calculate it, right? We have this app that's going to take in numbers, and it's going to allow us to calculate this a certain way. And now we need to display the result within the multi-line text field here. So what we do then is now we create another active form flow, right? You're getting the gist. We're just creating a series of active form flows. And we're going to say this is going to happen every time we hit the calculate event button. And this is going to be the calculate flow. Calculate. That's all I'm going to call it. I'm going to call this calculate toolbox. Okay, perfect. Now, we are going to use a step called evaluate dynamic expression, if I can spell it, expression. Now what this allows us to do, it's going to be the first one. So notice I had 2 hits. One is as a rule, and the other is as a flow step. We want the flow step one. We won't be utilizing the one as a rule. So we're going to remove that one. In this evaluate dynamic expression step, notice that it takes in a string and it outputs a decimal. So it does that computation for us. So we don't have to work, or not computation, it does that type change from a string to a decimal automatically for us, because it's looking for a string, which is the text that we've been displaying in that multi-line text box. And then it's going to output the decimal. So now what we're going to do is all we have to do, it's very simple. You just select from flow, and we take the form data, and it's going to be the text area value. Boom. And then we output it to the form or the text area. And we say change value. Boom. And now notice that even though it's displaying a decimal in a text field, Decisions is smart enough to cast that type and change it, so you don't have to worry about converting it. There are some instances in Decisions where you will need to convert and create a converter flow or use some of the convert type steps in Decisions, but in this case you don't have to. So now let us save this and let us calculate and see if our calculator calculates, and it does what it's supposed to. We're going to debug, and now what I'm going to do is let's do 1 plus 1, and let's calculate. 2, look at that. So we got 2. Now let's do 2 plus 6 times 9, calculate. 56. Let's do 56 minus 45, calculate. 11. Now we're going to do 11 squared. Calculate. 121. So now we have our calculator. And if I want to do 0.52 minus 100, oh, it looks like my 0 button's not working. I didn't configure that. Oh, no, that's not the 0 button I was looking for. So I'll troubleshoot the 0 button later. But we can calculate, and it does that. So 1, 2, oops. Let's do subtract 300 or 355, and we have negative. All right, so now let's fix my 0, because my 0 button ain't working. Let's find out why. All right, so that looks right. Did I tell it to run when it's clicked? Yep, that's what happens. I didn't tell it to run when I click on the button. There we go. Now it should be fixed. Let's test that and make sure. You always want to test. Even if you think it's going to work, you always want to test and make sure. So it looks like it's running the 9. So I clicked the wrong button. See? I clicked the wrong button. Ah, I didn't change this to 0. So it wasn't the button, I just didn't change that to 0. Save. Click OK. Perfect. Okay. So now that we have that button working, let's confirm. There we go. We got a whole list of zeros. Perfect. Now let's go. Now, since we have that working, now what we want to do is we want to make our clear button work. So we're going to create another active form flow. And we're going to call this clear screen. Yep, clear screen. Toolbox. So now what we want to do is we just want to do a create data step. And let's see if this will take care of it. And we're going to say this is going to be empty text is going to be my variable. I'm going to set this to a constant, and I'm just going to leave it. So it looks like it's going to yell at me if I do that. Empty string. Yep. Empty string. Save. So this should be empty. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to output that to the text area that we created. Boom. And I can call this clear screen. And let's see if this will clear that screen. So let's say I have 2 plus 2 minus 3 divided by 89. Calculate, and then I want to say clear. There we go. So it clears the screen. So 2 plus 3 divided by 89. Calculate. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to clear this, and then now we can hit done. All right. So now that should complete our calculator. So we've created a calculator app utilizing the active form flows and decisions to clear, calculate, and input new values in the screen. If you want, some things that I like to do is I'm going to add a label. Oops, on this side, add a label. And I'm going to say that this is powered by decisions. And then another thing you can do is I'm going to make this alignment to be right. And then I'm actually going to set this outcome button as invisible because I'm never going to use it. I already have the right clickable X in the header of it. So I'm not going to use that action button. So now when I save this, and I close this, now I can just right click my flow and run it. And now I have my calculator. I'm in version 7. I'm actually going to run it as in a dialog. And now you have your calculator. You can do 1 + 2, calculate. And then you're going to say, hey, I want to square root this, calculate, times 4 times 6 times 3 divided by, we're going to do 10, calculate, 28.8 divided by 80, calculate. We have 0.36. And then if I want to clear it, I can just select clear, and then my calculator clears. So that's how you create a calculator in the Decisions software. We utilize Decisions 7 to do it, but you can do it in Decisions version 6 as well. If you have any comments, feel free to add them in the comment section of the YouTube video. If you have any questions, you can also ask them in the contents of the comment section of the YouTube video. Please feel free to subscribe and like. I'm going to try to upload some videos of me building other things in Decisions and exposing different steps and how we utilize them so that you can have the best development experience and learn more about the tool. So this is Making Decisions, and I will see you guys later.